Well, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here tonight with you and to have the opportunity to share a few thoughts on why we might be able to trust the Bible. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't born into a family where people were religious in any way or believed in God. In fact, my dad and grandparents had escaped from Soviet occupation in Europe after the Second World War and came to Britain in 1948, landing at RAF Northolt, just in the clothes they were standing up in. And my grandfather, a brilliant scientist, as they were rebuilding their lives in Britain, forbade the mention of the word God or a Bible from crossing the threshold of the family. My dad went on to become an academic and taught at universities around the world. My mother similarly had no Christian faith whatsoever, but towards the middle of their 30s, they were asking big existential questions about meaning. And my father actually had an extraordinary vision one day of Jesus. And at the end of this vision, he felt like he wanted to pray. And he found himself just in his study at home, kneeling down. But as he looked at what he was seeing of Jesus, he said, "Give me the words, I don't know how to pray," not having been raised with any prayer at all. And the words that came to him and that he spoke to Jesus that day were, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." And he got up off the floor, a Christian. He was fairly surprised a few days later after he'd gone to a shop to buy himself a Bible to read those same words said by someone else to Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. So what I want to suggest to you is that if like me, the Bible wasn't a kind of inherited tradition to believe it, to just accept that something is true because it's in the Bible, like me, perhaps you might want to go on a journey of discovering whether the Bible can be trusted. You see, the Bible is actually an amazing book. I'm so glad it came onto the horizon of my family's life. And for the last 30 years, it's a book that I've spent time exploring and asking this question as to whether it can be trusted. The Bible was written on 3 continents by more than 40 authors. And one of the interesting things about those authors is that they're not all the same. And that they're not also all really powerful people kind of imposing their will on the world, which is often how the Bible is perceived. In fact, yes, we do have powerful people like King David or the diplomat Isaiah helping to write the Bible. But we also have really poor and disadvantaged people writing, like the prophet Amos, whose job was to be the dresser of sycamore fig trees, the dirtiest job for that culture. Now, the Bible's kind of extraordinary diversity isn't just reflected in how it's written, it's also reflected in how it was preserved. You see, when we ask a question about the reliability of any ancient text, one of the questions would be, how many trustworthy witnesses to that ancient text are there? How many manuscripts are there? And with reference to the Bible, we'd be talking about over 5,800 Greek manuscripts and over 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and then many other languages as well. And those manuscripts were spread through the ancient world, which would have made a control of changing them very, very difficult to do, in fact, impossible. Now, if you're not really impressed with that, it might be helpful to compare the Bible's manuscript tradition with famous major Greek authors of the time. And if you were to lay those alongside one another, what you would see is that Greek authors have maybe up to a dozen manuscript witnesses to their writing. But those manuscripts that survive are separated from the original by over 1,000 years. So 1,000 years has passed between what survives and what was written. When it comes to the New Testament, we're talking about thousands and thousands of manuscripts, not just a dozen, thousands, and the earliest of them are separated not by 1,000 years, but by decades. Just mere decades between what was written and what survives. And what that means is that In the terms of ancient literature, the Bible is astonishingly well attested. But what about the content? You may be able to trust the text, but can we trust what was actually written? And I want to suggest that there are many reasons I could give you why the answer is yes to that, but let me just give you two tonight. Firstly, I think we can trust the content of what was written because it is often externally verifiable. In other words, there are other sources that back up what the Bible is writing. So we could take, for example, the Roman writer Tacitus, a Roman historian who records for us these bare facts. He says that Christ was executed at the edict of Pontius Pilate in the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. So one of the most central claims of the Christian faith, that Jesus Christ died by crucifixion in a very particular time period, we don't just know that because of the Gospels, because of the Bible. What the Bible said is backed up by an external source. Let me give you another reason to trust the Bible, to trust the content of what was written, not just the manuscript tradition. This other reason is to do with how women are centered and included in the narrative of the Bible. You see, in the ancient world, a woman's word was not regarded as having equal validity to a man's word. If you were in a court of law, you needed male testimony in order to trust that what had occurred had actually occurred. Yet, the Bible being written into a context where that was the prejudice, that was the presupposition that you would need male witnesses, the Bible hangs the most centrally important aspects of the Christian faith on the testimony of women. Now, let me put it this way. If you wanted to make up a story that God existed, that God had taken human flesh to come and dwell among us, that he lived among us, and then he died for the sins of the world, and then he'd completely overcome death, leaving his tomb empty. If you wanted to make up that story, you would never position women as the primary witnesses to it. But think about it. Who is the primary witness to the idea of the incarnation, that God was born as a human being? The primary witness to that is a teenage girl called Mary. And we're going to think about her, aren't we, in nativity plays and Christmas carols in a few weeks. The authenticity of this truth of the virgin birth of Christ is hung on the testimony of a teenage girl. Think about the crucifixion of Jesus. The four gospel narratives tell us that the male disciples deserted Jesus, but the women stood at the cross. So the details in the gospel accounts about the crucifixion are recorded and borne witness to by women. And then we see that women are the first to witness the empty tomb and the resurrection of Christ. Now, skeptics believe that the centering of women in this way lends credence and authenticity to the narrative because it is inconvenient that women were so positioned. So that's just a few thoughts on why we can trust the Bible. We can trust the manuscript tradition. There are extraordinary evidences for the manuscripts of the Bible. We can trust the content of what was written down, which is verified by other external sources. And we can trust this book because it doesn't skirt over inconvenient things, including the role of women. Thank you so much.